Mark, chapter 7. Then the Pharisees and some of the scribes came together to him, having come from Jerusalem. Now when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is, with unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands in a special way, holding the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other things which they have received and hold, like the washing of cups, pitchers, copper vessels, and couches. Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands?" He answered and said to them, "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men.' For laying aside the commandment of God, you hold the tradition of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, and many other such things you do." He said to them, "All too well you reject the commandment of God, that you may keep your tradition. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and 'He who curses father or mother, let him be put to death.' But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, 'Whatever profit you might have received from me is korban,' that is, a gift to God, then you no longer let him do anything for his father or his mother, making the word of God of no effect through your tradition which you have handed down, and many such things you do." When he had called all the multitude to himself, he said to them, "Hear me, everyone, and understand. There is nothing that enters a man from outside which can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are the things that defile a man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear." When he had entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. So he said to them, "Are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods? And he said, what comes out of a man, that defiles a man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man."
Hello everyone, it's Brother Randy with SourMilkMinistries. Welcome to video 22, Triple Play, Untwisting Mark 7. Now, as you may have gleaned from the title, there are 3 points of contention that I have with this passage, which we just read from the New King James Version. Or sticking with our baseball theme, there are 3 common errors in the interpretation of Mark 7 and with its sister passage found in Matthew 15, as both of those passages are addressing the very same incident. Now, the first one of these errors is an error in context, and the second 2 errors build off of that. Now, I don't know if this is a matter that people aren't properly interpreting the context from the beginning, or they're simply losing sight of it. All I know is that somehow apples get turned into oranges because people routinely cite these passages to demonstrate that it's now somehow okay for us to eat unclean meats when neither one of those passages have anything to do with that. So, what I want to do is reread Mark 7. We'll be reading verses 1 through 5, watch a short video, and then pick up with verse 14 through 23. And we will be reading from the Remedy, which is a New Testament paraphrase translation. And then we'll pick it up from there.
The theology professors from the school of the Pharisees, along with some of the church lawyers, all of whom cherished a legal theology, came from Jerusalem to monitor what Jesus was doing. They saw some of his disciples eating with hands that had not been washed in the proscribed ritualistic way. The Pharisees, promoting the tradition of church elders who taught a legal religion, influenced the Jews so much that none would eat unless they first performed a ritualistic washing with an insignificant amount of water. When they return from shopping, they won't eat unless they perform the ritualistic hand washing. And they observe many other rituals, such as washing of cups, pots, and pans, thinking that doing so provides moral purity, but in reality it doesn't. So these legal religion theologians asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live by the standards of church tradition and respect the church elders instead of ignoring our traditions by eating with hands that have not been ritually cleansed?"
The Pharisee ritual of washing the hands begins with a special jug that fulfills certain requirements and specifications. And you take that jug, and by the way, if I take a bar of soap and rub it over my hands and put water on them, I have not fulfilled the ritual of washing my hands. I have to use the jug and do a specific ritual. The ritual begins, I pour water over my left hand, then I pour water over my right hand, and then I do this a second time, pour water over my left hand, and pour water over my right hand. And according to some traditions, I do this a third time. I pour water over my left hand and pour water over my right hand. And I still have not fulfilled the Pharisee ritual of washing the hands because I have not done the most important part of this ritual. And the key part of this ritual I have not done is the blessing that comes after the actual pouring of the water. And the blessing in Hebrew goes as follows: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim, which translated into English, "Blessed art thou, Lord, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments, commanding us to wash the hands." And this is what Pharisees say every time they eat bread, every time they sit down for a proper meal. They wash their hands and make this blessing. And I actually grew up with this blessing, saying this on a daily basis. And at a certain point, I went to my rabbis and I said, "We're saying this all the time, several times a day. Where are we actually commanded to wash the hands? If we're making this blessing, commanding us to wash the hands, where is that commandment in the Torah?" And I'd already by this point started to study Torah. And they explained to me that there's actually nowhere in the Torah are we commanded to wash the hands. However, the rabbis have made what's called a rabbinical enactment. The rabbis, according to the rabbis, have the authority to make enactments that add new laws to the Torah, add new laws that the people must follow. And these rabbinical enactments, these are called in Hebrew by the Hebrew word takanot. So these takanot are these rabbinical enactments, and the classic example of one of the takanot is the commandment of the rabbis to wash the hands. Well, I asked my rabbi, okay, the rabbis made this enactment to wash the hands. Why are we blessing God for commanding us to do that? And my rabbis explained to me that God has given the rabbis the authority to make these enactments, and by obeying the rabbis, you're indirectly obeying God. Now, I asked, where do the rabbis given the authority to make these enactments? And they said, "Oh, stop asking so many questions."
Verse 14. Jesus turned to the crowd, called them to himself, and said, "Everyone, listen to me and understand what really matters. There is nothing outside a person that by being ingested can change the person's character. Therefore, it cannot make them impure. But what comes out of their mouth is an expression of their character, and that is what makes them impure. Let those whose minds are open to truth understand." After they left the crowd and returned home, the disciples asked Jesus to explain what he had meant by this example. Looking at them, Jesus asked, "Are your minds so dulled by tradition that you don't understand? Don't you realize that nothing that enters the body from the outside can contaminate or defile?" Why not? Because it doesn't enter the mind. It doesn't become part of the character, but simply goes into the stomach and then out of the body. Jesus was making it clear that no food could make a person morally impure. He explained further, what comes out of the mouth is an expression of what is in the heart, an expression of the character. And evil in the character is what makes a person impure. For evil originates from the infection of selfishness in the heart, such as evil thoughts, sexual perversity, murder, dishonesty, theft, betrayal of trust, greed, cruelty, deception, vulgarity, envy, evil speaking, gossip, pride, and foolishness. All these destructive deviations from God's design come from inside, and this is what makes a person impure.
Now with that, we know unequivocally that the context of this dialogue between the Pharisees and Yeshua, aka Jesus, is that of a Pharisaical hand-washing ritual. Mark 7, verse 5. Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands?" They are referring to a man-made ritual, the tradition of the elders. They are not referring to a commandment of God. And Yeshua's entire answer is based on this question. Thus, the context of his words are based on the context of the question. You cannot disregard that. In fact, in Matthew 15, at the very end of Yeshua's dialogue with the scribes and the Pharisees, he reiterates the context of the question, the context of his statement. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. The context from the beginning of his words to the end of his words are about eating with unwashed hands. So every single word he says in between, you have to keep in the proper context. And when you do that, you will not come away with this crazy idea that Yeshua is saying, oh yeah, it's okay to eat unclean meats now. I'm going to go ahead and throw one of the commandments of God under the bus. Even though that's a commandment of God, and I'm talking about not obeying the commandments of men and obeying the commandments of God, I'm going to throw one of the commandments under the bus. That makes no sense whatsoever, because that is not what's happening here. Now, with that, let's move on to the other two errors, which will only further strengthen what we've already covered so far. Mark 7:15, New King James Version. There is nothing that enters a man from outside which can defile him. But the things which come out of him, those are the things that defile a man. Unquestionably, this is the verse that I hear cited most often concerning Mark 7, even from those who recognize the proper context. They'll say, yeah, I understand that it's talking about a Pharisaical hand-washing ritual. However, look what the Messiah says in verse 15. There is nothing that enters a man which can defile him. In fact, Yeshua reiterates this in verse 18 after his disciples asked him to explain what he just said. So let's actually go read verse 18, and we'll be reading from the NIV. Are you so dull? He asked. Again, this is Yeshua talking to his disciples. Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? Now, the reason I'm citing this verse from the NIV is because I recently had someone cite this verse to me. I was in a conversation about Mark 7 with a person who fully acknowledged the proper context. Nonetheless, they cited this passage, accused me of being dull, and asked, what part of nothing don't I understand? What part of nothing, all caps, don't I understand? Now, the ironic part about that is that in reality, I'm the one who believes that to be true, that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them, whereas the person who's citing that to me doesn't believe it. Let me explain. Okay, what are we talking about here? We're talking about eating, right? When we speak of how nothing from the outside, the context is eating. So there's nothing that we can eat which can defile us. Again, I completely agree 100%. The problem is that people misinterpret that. They're interjecting something that's not being said. Yeshua is not, all caps, not saying that there's nothing we can eat that's defiled. We're not talking about whether or not the things we ingest, whether they're defiled. You see, that's where people are going with that. That's how they interpret that, which is completely wrong. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about do the things that we ingest, regardless of it's clean or unclean, whatever it is, okay, nothing, whatever, same thing, broad, universal spectrum, whatever it is that we ingest, will those things defile us? Will the things that we ingest cause us to become blasphemers, cause us to become murderers, sexually perverse, etc.? In other words, did Jeffrey Dahmer, in case you don't know who that is, a cannibalistic mass murderer, horrific murderer, did he become a murderer because he accidentally ingested a murder muffin? Does someone become a blasphemer because once upon a time they ingested a blasphemy berry? I don't think so. That's the context of what Yeshua is saying. That there's nothing from the outside that's going to cause us to be evil and to be wicked. It's not from the things we ingest. It's not from eating with unwashed hands. And people completely turn the context upside down and say, oh, look, Yeshua is saying that there's nothing I can eat is defiled. Well, if that's true, Mr. What part of nothing don't you understand? You could be a cannibal, right? Yeshua declared that's okay, right? Oh, wait a minute. Now suddenly we're backtracking, aren't we? Oh, well, that's ridiculous. We're talking about food here. Exactly. And who defines food? Who defined food for his children? God did. And you know what? He said pork is not food, not for the children of God.
I am the Lord your God, which have separated you from other people. Ye shall therefore put difference between clean beasts and unclean, and between unclean fowls and clean. And ye shall not make your souls abominable by beast, or by fowl, or by any manner of living thing that creepeth on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. And ye shall be holy unto me, for I the Lord am holy, and have severed you from other people, that ye should be mine.
All Yeshua is saying here is that the evil a man exhibits comes from the wickedness of his heart. It doesn't come from something he ingested. The heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? He's not saying that it's okay for us to be disobedient. Because again, God calls for his children to be holy, to be set apart, and not to eat unclean meats, which he calls an abomination. Yeshua is not telling us that it's okay for us to commit abominations. And if we choose to ignore him and be disobedient, that disobedience came from the wickedness of our hearts and not from something we ingested. Now, let's move on to the final error and wrap this up. And that error is found in Mark 7:19. We will be reading from the NIV because that's where we're going to end up anyway. That's because this translation includes that parenthetical statement at the end. For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body. In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. Now, you can see why, if your contention was that you could eat anything you wanted, why you would be quoting from the NIV and not the King James Version, because the King James Version and several other versions do not have this parenthetical statement at the end. Now, contrary to what some of you may expect, I am not going to contest the parenthetical statement. I am going to accept it as being 100% biblical, even though I don't believe that it is. If you read translations like the King James Version, you will see all Yeshua is doing is describing the human digestive system. Food goes into our stomach and then out of the body. It's purged, it's cleansed, out of the body and into the sewer it goes. But nonetheless, some translators include this parenthetical statement, and saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. So you can bet the farm that if your intention is to support the idea that you can eat anything you want, you're going to be quoting from translations like the NIV. Regardless, it's a completely moot point if you understand the context and you keep what you're reading in context. In saying this, Yeshua declared that all foods are clean, i.e., you don't have to perform some silly man-made ritual. The food is clean, I made it clean. I made it for you to receive with thanksgiving. 1 Timothy 4. That's all he's saying, assuming that this is actually what he said to begin with, which again, I don't believe that it is. But if it is, that's what he means. You don't have to perform the man-made ritual. The food is clean, full stop. Period. The food is clean. That's what it's saying. Now, some people will object to that and say, well, it's ridiculous to suggest that Yeshua is declaring that all foods are clean if they're clean to begin with. And indeed they are. We're talking about a Jewish audience here. When you say the word food to a Jew, it doesn't include shrimp and pork. Food means clean meats. Nonetheless, why would Yeshua need to say that all foods are clean if they're clean to begin with? Again, keep it in the proper context, because we have Pharisees condemning his disciples for eating a piece of bread. They're condemning them for eating it without washing their hands. So indeed, someone is saying that these foods are not clean. That's why he declared the food's clean. He's the supreme authority. So he declared that the food is clean. You don't have to do the Pharisaical hand-washing ritual. That's the context of Mark 7 and Matthew 15, period. Those passages are not telling us that it's okay to eat unclean meats, which is an abomination.